Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Glazier. I absolutely love all aspects of music and the arts, and I'm constantly looking for new ways to improve what I do by interviewing musicians and artists. This podcast will be an extension of my video series, The Art Inside the Craft, and I have a number of amazing interviews done and ready to be put out. This is episode number 1, and I wanted to kick things off with a bang. I did an interview with director, writer, producer, and one hell of a drummer, Scott Rosenbaum. His documentary, Sidemen, The Long Road to Glory, is the story of 3 incredible musicians, Pinetop Perkins, Willie Big Eyes Smith, and Hubert Sumlin. Those guys backed up blues legends Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and have influenced everyone from Jimi Hendrix to Bonnie Raitt. Let's listen in on that interview now. See, I was a backer of the Sidemen film, so that's kind of how I got into you in the film. I'm a huge blues fan. You know, I'm only 4 hours west of Chicago, so I've kind of grown up with a lot of those influences.
On that note, I mean, to people like you, the fact that you believed in the project, you and all the other Kickstarter backers, it was essential. I mean, and quite frankly, amazing in its the way it felt like such a marathon at that point. I mean, we had already been in South by Southwest and started to get some really positive reviews. The film was done, but we still hadn't raised enough money to clear all the music and the clips.
Oh, yeah.
And we were hoping, and it didn't turn out that way, that we would make a sale at South by Southwest, and that would be enough to cover that bill, and you know, all things would be equal. But you know, best laid plans, and you know, certainly the naivete of an independent filmmaker, it doesn't always work out that way. So really, at that point, the last resort was to turn to Kickstarter. I didn't really want to do it. It was, you know, a lot of work after having just made the film, but you know, it couldn't stop until it was done, and thankfully people like you all stepped up and contributed and allowed it to happen. You know, otherwise it would still be sitting on my floor here on a hard drive.
Yeah, that's awesome that it got done. And then as soon as I saw that popped up and I contributed, I just check it almost daily or weekly to see if it was hitting the goal, if people were going there, because you know, it's just such an incredible film that had to be seen. So
yeah, you know, it was, if it wasn't for those guys, I never would have done that. I mean, I really felt funny having to do the Kickstarter thing and having, you know, not only to put it up, but to like be the one asking and making videos. Really not my strong suit and not really my comfort zone. I didn't want to do it, but I just knew that if that didn't happen, this film was not going to happen, and just couldn't let that be the case. So I'm really grateful to all the folks that did step up and contribute.
And it's, you know, for me as somebody outside the business, it's cool to be able to help, and then, you know, like you take a lot of pride in that. Like every time I talk about the film, I say I was a supporter, so I got the film. If you want to see it, come over, we'll watch it. You know, I'll let you borrow it. You can check it out.
That's the nice thing about the crowdfunding is there's then all of a sudden, in this case, over 2,000 people that can, you know, take ownership of this film, that if they didn't participate, it wouldn't exist. And, you know, they're every bit as important. And it's a great thing to have a kind of a shared experience on that scale of something like this. It's pretty unique. Yeah. And, you know, I've met so many backers, you know, at festivals or screenings, and it's always the same thing. It's just a gratifying experience on both ends.
Yeah, and it's cool. It's cool too because you can, when you see something that you're really interested in, instead of it, you know, like you say, if that hadn't happened, it'd just be sitting in your hard drive. And for me, that loves the blues and music, to be able to say, you know, this got out. Everybody needs to see it. It's a huge thing. So
yeah, I appreciate that too. Yeah.
So you're actually in a band now, are you?
I am. It's quite funny. I played drums much like you described since I was 13, so 14, so it's 35 plus years. Yeah. You know, just mucking around. just because I love the music, garage band stuff and bands in college and that kind of thing. And then, married, kids, house in the suburbs, I really didn't have many bands. I couldn't find guys around me. It was so strange for years and years. And I mean, my drums went, unplayed for years at a time.
Yeah.
And then just recently, as a result of this film, I was introduced to a guy that used to manage Hubert.
Oh, nice.
Years and years ago. And he actually lived 2 towns over from me. It was crazy. It was just by the release of Sidemen that a mutual friend said, hey, you should meet this guy. And he had a band that needed a drummer. It was the craziest thing, like 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago. And I just fit right in, and I got, a bunch of great new friends, guys who like the blues, and a band, which, a local band. Everyone's close by. Like,
wow.
It's amazing, Yeah. So, we've been jamming on a bunch of stuff, and just have that Hubert connection and hear all these different stories from like a different time in his life and compare notes. It's been interesting.
And also in preparation for this, I went back and just rewatched The Perfect Age of Rock and Roll.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which I remember seeing, when it came out.
Did you really?
Yeah, I actually did.
I have to admit it's such a painful, an amazing and painful thing, because the critical reception of that film was so harsh that no one really saw it. And the few people that I know that I've run into that see it or reached out online really love it. And it's just, it's a shame. But,
as a music lover, anything with music, I would just devour it. And I have since I was a kid, so... I did remember it, but I was like, man, I got to rewatch that, so I just did last night.
Wow, I appreciate that. It's funny. I hadn't, just because it has left a sour taste in my mouth, I hadn't really watched it or seen anything of it until last week myself. My son is dating a girl, and he's like, I want to show her your film. And all right, so we put it on. I hadn't looked at it in 7 years, and I just sat down and watched it. And I'm like, it really wasn't that bad. I mean, I would have changed a couple of lines here and there, maybe directed a scene a little differently, but you know what? I did the best I could. I thought it came out well, but that's life, in this business.
No, it was great. So you and Jason wrote that. And so,
yes.
And then I also, of course, you wrote the Sidemen together as another project. So I was just kind of wondering, do you guys have like similar music taste, or were you just friends, or you guys just work well together, or kind of what's the dynamic?
It's an interesting question. That's another sort of incredible story that, it has its beginnings in when I left Wall Street, wrote Perfect Age of Rock and Roll. I wrote and rewrote it for 2 years. And again, like I said to you before, I didn't expect anything to come of it. It was just an exercise in, finishing the discipline of writing a screenplay, a real screenplay, not just, notes or an outline. And I was essentially a new screenwriter. I had taken screenwriting classes. Of course, I was a journalism major and always a writer, but screenwriting is an animal unto itself. So it took me a while to get the script into a decent screenplay shape. And at that point, I had a bunch of different writers in LA kind of mentoring me, really basically telling me how bad I am. And now I have to do a rewrite. But, that's how you grow. And I was lucky to have a couple of mentors who were pretty hard on me, and rightfully so. And it causes you to have to focus and learn and be better. So went through that process a whole bunch. A couple of fits and starts with production, which is, always the case. And in the midst of that uncertainty, I was asked by Spike Lee to be his apprentice on a film he was making. He had seen the short film that Jason and I had made. That was a prelude to Perfect Age. And then we were able to get him the script, and he kind of took me under his wing there for a minute and said, hey, before we do this, come with me. We're going to Italy. It was the filming of Miracle at St. Anna. And I had a great opportunity to really spend 3 months on set in Italy watching him make, a major film.
Yeah.
Learned so much, and then came back and knew that Perfect Age needed a rewrite. Jason and I had made the short film, and had the beginnings of our creative working relationship together. And he knew I was unhappy with the shape of the script, and he and I had never sat down on it together. And he said, you know what, let's take 2 weeks. If you don't like what we do together, you can throw it out. You know, it's, no harm, no foul. And really, we sat down and started writing the rewrite of Perfect Age, and it just all flowed. It was great. It was, for me, it was a breath of fresh air, a fresh perspective. And, 10 years later, we've had a lot of creative collaborations, and it is one of those things, that you always hope for as an artist, to find somebody that you connect with. As far as your question about were we into the same music, absolutely not. I mean, he comes from, not that I didn't love the music that he's into, and that's what we bonded over, which is like more hardcore industrial. We bonded over Marilyn Manson, because that was sort of the impetus for the Spider character in Perfect Age of Rock and Roll. Was like a Manson, Alice Cooper, David Johansen, glam rock with industrial edge, and that's really where Jason comes from. He has had many bands in New York City that are really of that ilk, and really terrific bands. And when I was looking for the music and the musician for Coda, which was the prelude to Perfect Age, it was kind of some excerpted material. Jason was introduced to me, and we talked, and he volunteered his band to perform in the short as this kind of big Nine Inch Nails Marilyn Manson set piece. And then he also, in condition of doing that for me, giving me the band and the song, he said, I want to play the role of Spider, which was pretty interesting for me. It was the very first thing I ever directed. And yeah, that was the beginning of it. And we have had a great collaboration since.
Yeah, I actually went to see if I could find Coda, and I couldn't find it to rent. Otherwise, I would have picked it up too.
It's so funny. I was thinking, because we've been talking about this lately, and he and I were together and talking about Coda. I have the DVDs probably sitting right next to me somewhere. And it's nowhere. I mean, we never put it up. I should just. I'm half embarrassed, because it's like my film school sort of film. It was. I'd been advised by a good friend, a great doc filmmaker, when I left Wall Street. I said, should I go back to film school? He said, for the same money, you could probably make a short film and learn a lot more in a shorter period of time. And, at that point, I was in my early 30s. I wasn't really interested in going back into the classroom. So that's what I did. And, I should put it up. It's got some moments, but it's definitely a first film for sure. But,
I kind of just, in my research, I try to learn as much as I can about everything. So that was.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, that's admirable. You need to be as a journalist. I mean, even you face the same thing just doing interviews, like in the case of Sidemen, with so many different musicians that but there's always more to know, and you want to be able to talk to them and have the subject know that you know their material. So I appreciate that, and I empathize. I know how hard it is.
And so in Perfect Age, obviously you had Hubert Pinetop and Big Eyes in there. Did you specifically write those guys in for that? And was that kind of like, the seeds of Sidemen, or did you just kind of come up with a scene and go, well, I need some blues guys, and then start looking around to see who was kind of out there?
No. That's one of the amazing things, and I guess if you look at this whole process in its entirety, certain things are meant to be, and here we are sitting, I don't know, 10 years since we shot that scene in Perfect Age, and obviously now Sidemen's out, and so much has flowed from that experience. And really what happened was, when Jason and I were doing the rewrite, as I described before, and we were just changing the narrative, condensing characters, all kinds of stuff was going on, and he suggested a scene as they're going across country where they stop into a juke joint, and I knew the blues stuff intimately. See, this is where Jason comes more from an industrial hard rock scene. I'm more from classic rock and blues, and discovered the blues through the classic rock artists, particularly the British invasion. So again, it goes back to the creative collaboration. You talked about that with Jason, and it just kind of coalesced. And I had specifically written in Hubert, Pinetop, Willie. I believe I had put James Cotton to play the harp, and I forgot who I had put down, who I'd written in the script to play bass. But when we approached their booking agent, Hugh Southard, who really managed most of those guys and booked them in various live performances, he put that band together essentially. I mean, he got us Willie Pine and Hubert, and he said, Cotton's not available, but Sugar Blue is. Would you like him? And of course, I mean, Sugar Blue is the guy that played with the Rolling Stones on those incredible late 70s, early 80s tracks. It was amazing. And then they brought in Robert Stroger, and the band was formed, and they couldn't have been better. They all said yes. You reach out to actors for roles and whatnot, and it's sometimes they don't respond or they don't care or whatever. Yeah. These guys were phenomenal. They were in from the word go, and then spending a day on set filming that scene, because it took a day, and it was an incredible day, very pressure packed, very hot, late July day, and they were just, not a complaint. They sat there. It's a long shoot day, 12 plus hours. It's not as smooth and glamorous as it looks on screen. You're doing take after take, and there's no air conditioning. It was really incredible. And just spending lunch hour with them, talking to them about these firsthand stories of all these, mythical figures to me. Robert Johnson. I mean, Pinetop had firsthand experiences with Robert Johnson, but yet you think of Robert Johnson almost as this Greek myth that just really didn't exist. It's just part of this incredible folklore. So just getting these accounts from them about Muddy and Wolf and John Lee Hooker and Little Walter, and I mean on and on, and all these stories about their upbringing, I just was inspired to, what I wanted to do is really make a Last Waltz style celebration concert of them as the core band, and try to bring in all the classic rock and blues players that, have made that part of their repertoire, whether it be the Stones or the Doors or Led Zeppelin and on, as everybody knows. That was the original intent, but certainly as a new filmmaker, I didn't have the reach to be able to pull that off, or the budget to pull that off. So our theory was to kind of do it in parts, because Hugh was putting the guys out on the road using The Perfect Age of Rock and Roll as their name, and which he had asked, is that fine? I said, of course, if they need something that could help sort of galvanize the package, and they could book gigs. And I said, let's just film the concerts and try to get guests in whatever city. So bring the concert to them. And we managed to do 3 or 4 shows, mostly in California. So between San Francisco, LA, and San Diego, we got a few of those kind of dream pairings. In case of like Robbie Krieger is primary in that example of him playing Backdoor Man and Little Red Rooster with Hubert, who of course played it originally with Wolf, and I discovered it through the Doors. But then to put them together, that was the pinnacle of the idea. It was going to unfold slowly, but as you know from watching the film and being a fan, they all passed away in 2011. So that kind of turned the Last Waltz concept on its head. And it took a long time to figure out what to do, or even if it was right to do anything, quite frankly, with the material. But it was pretty clear that we had something special. They were into it, and now it just kind of heightened the mission even more now that they passed, to do something that really honored everything that they were about. Because on one hand, and I said it earlier, you feel like everybody knows about the blues impact on rock and roll, but I think if people know it, they know it generally. But when you really lay it out there, as we tried to do in Sidemen, and say, hey, the Rolling Stones played this song and it was seminal to their early years, and the Doors did this song, and Led Zeppelin, and I think it kind of, I hope anyway, it did what we intended, which was really highlight it and show the importance of what these guys did and the importance of the blues, and of course its place in American history.
So when you went around to get the interviews with like Darren and Susan and Greg and Warren and all those guys, when you approached them, what was their response? Was it like, just specifically because it was those guys, were they kind of like, oh, hell yeah, I'm on board, or finally, or?
Yeah, I would say nearly, well, 100%. You know, I'm saying 100% because I was able to achieve beyond my wildest dreams. When I first sat down to do this, I'd written a list of probably 110, if I remember, dream performers that I wanted, and I got a lot of them in the end. And it is all a testament to Willie, Pine, and Hubert, and the blues in general, that once they saw, you know, a clip and they saw who it was about, most artists were, you know, very willing to do it. The challenge for me was getting to them. That took some time because, again, like I said, I didn't really have a lot of connections that were able to communicate what the film was about. And, you know, these artists are busy, their managers are busy, so it's tough to get through the noise. But once I met a few people who were able to explain it directly, almost everybody that was asked participated if they were able to. And again, a real testament to the love that they all have for Willie, Pine, and Hubert. I mean, I was just at the Bowie celebration show in New York last night.
Yeah, I saw your post on that. That was cool.
Yeah, and just like getting to meet Charlie Sexton, I mean, I was blown away. But and the guy's got incredible Pinetop stories. You know, it's like their impact is so far and wide, and they're just how great they were, and it was how great it was to be with them. Everybody just lights up when they talk about them if they had the good fortune to know them. Yeah,
they're really incredible players, and it comes through in the documentary just how like sincere and humble and just fantastic people they were. You know, at least that's what I get out of it when I watch it.
I appreciate that. You know, it was a real challenge because, you know, as a journalist, you're taught, you know, when you're doing a story, fair and balanced, and you want to remain impartial. But we were so close to those guys that when we were doing the editing, I just wanted to make sure that not only did I capture who they were, and it was really a desire to have people, you know, have a feeling as if they got to sit with these guys and talk to them for a little bit, but then also to paint a balanced picture. You know, it wasn't always pretty. They weren't always the best behaved, you know. They weren't angels, and they wouldn't want you to believe that. So that was a challenge, but I'm glad that came through because they were just so, you know, endearing.
And when you were interviewing those three and kind of following them around, did you kind of run into some other blues guys or guys that I guess were kind of still kicking around at the time from the old days?
Yeah, I was telling the story last night to my friend as we went to that show. Honey Boy Edwards was a real heartbreaker for me. We had booked flights and secured gear and insurance for the gear and everything to fly to Chicago to interview him for the film in December of 2010. And right as we were about to leave for the airport, his manager called that he'd gotten sick and had to go into the hospital, and, you know, we'd have to reschedule. And we were disappointed, of course, but it was obviously he was up there in years. It was a concern, and wasn't doing well. We tried it again in January, and he got sick again. And Honey Boy, as you know, he too died in 2011. So many of them all went in 1 year. So, you know, Honey Boy was one that I would have really liked to have gotten his perspective. He was so, you know, such a great storyteller right to the end. So that's a disappointment. But yeah, of course, run into many of the artists along the way, and so many of them they all played together in so many different bands or through the course of history. It was great to see, you know.
And so I know Mark Maron is pretty deep in the blues and plays guitar. How did you end
Yeah.
up choosing him, or how did he end up getting involved with the project as well?
Well, Jason is a big podcast guy, and
Ah,
turned me on to Maron's podcast, and was listening to it for, I guess, a couple of years by that point. And you hear enough of his interviews with musicians, and he mentions the blues, and he mentions basically the whole narrative of our film, and is a big preacher in the impact of the blues, and would talk about Hubert by name. So again, Hubert's a sideman. Unless you're really into it, you're not going to know Hubert's name.
right.
And Maron always was so knowledgeable about Hubert's contribution and his relationship and role in Wolf's band. And so when it came down to making a short list and trying to find a narrator for the film, like so many other things that we tried to do in the film, we tried to make different choices so it didn't come out like every other blues doc that I have on my DVD shelf, which they're great,
Yeah.
but we wanted to try something different to hopefully, broaden the audience, who might not be into blues, and we reached out to a couple of people, and we were able to connect with Maron, who again responded because it was a film about Hubert and those guys, and we were already in South by Southwest, and we didn't have the narrator yet, and we reached Maron like early in January of that year. The festival's in March. Scheduled it very quickly to record his voiceover narration. Got it in there. Basically, felt like getting the film on the hard drive and running onto the plane to get to South by. It was almost that close. But he was great and has been so supportive all the way through, mentioning it on different podcasts when we had some big events, whether it's the theatrical release or the the festivals and things. So
Right.
very grateful for his participation as well.
So, I guess the only thing I kind of have left is what's next for you? What else are you working on, or what other projects are going to be coming up for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's because everything in this business seems to have a mind of its own and takes its own time. So I've written several screenplays, narrative screenplays, that I'd certainly love to get back and do a narrative feature film, but they're difficult to get off the ground. But there are some scripts circulating around, and fingers crossed as always. A lot of music videos of late, it seems, and
Cool.
one really interesting project that I just finished 2 days ago. This poet from California, Noah Lekis, is releasing a poetry book.
Oh, wow.
And the artist Alan Forbes, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He did the graphics for the Black Crowes, for instance. I think he did the original Black Crowes logo, and so many of their concert posters, and so many bands, the Misfits, the Dead. Just incredible artist. Had agreed, because Noah's work was so fantastic, agreed to do the book cover art, and then Noah in turn asked 5 filmmakers to do a piece to a spoken word poem. He was going to choose 5 poems from the book, and so he reached out to me based on having seen Sidemen, which is pretty gratifying, to do one of those. And I just finished it this week, and they're going to be using my short film for the PR release of the book. So I'll send you that. Yeah. I'll send you that when they release it. It really came out great. So just really trying to find the most interesting projects I can, and keep making films, and definitely have another blues doc that I'm in the midst of. Not something that I had anticipated after Sidemen, but this kind of fell in my lap. Very interesting story, which I'm looking forward to finishing that. We're doing a short, because I don't think I have the wherewithal right now to do another full-length blues doc, but interesting story nonetheless, and one that I just felt compelled to have to do.
Well, that kind of covers everything that I was kind of curious about. The only other thing I'll ask is I guess, who are you listening to, or what are you into now as far as music? Besides, all the old stuff, the good blues stuff. there anybody new that you like?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that because as part of that poetry project that I was talking about, Noah introduced me to a couple of great bands from Southern California that I really hadn't. I heard the names of some of them, but hadn't really listened to them. And those are the guys that are doing the backing track for all of his 5 spoken word poetry pieces.
Oh, cool.
And, I got to hang with them. I went out there to shoot the recording a couple of weeks ago of the music for the piece that I was going to make the film for. So I felt it was essential to film that process for the video. I thought it would be a cool thing to see.
Yeah, definitely.
And I got to hang out with them. And these are guys in the bands are Howlin' Rain, Mrs. Henry, and Creature in the Woods, and they're all kind of a group of musicians that go in and out of these bands, and they're fantastic players. And so that was another real incredible benefit of doing that project, just to get to hang out with these musicians and discover these new bands. So just amazing, all of them. The band, the Mrs. Henry band, just did a tribute to The Last Waltz, and they posted it online. Yeah, you should check it out. They posted the SoundCloud of the entire show. The quality of the musicianship, I was just, as a Last Waltz, devotee, I was blown away. So it was great to meet them and watch them perform. So those 3 bands are probably the newest bands, at least newest to me. And they're super talented. And I got to say, I've always been a huge Tom Petty fan, and certainly having lost him recently. Yeah, that's. I listened to his radio program on Sirius XM. He fortunately had done about 11 or 12 seasons of that Buried Treasure show. Yeah. And I just seem to keep going to that, partly to hear his voice and also just his wisdom on music. You're hearing the entire history of music, and he kind of guides you through it. I dig that, especially when I'm writing and working. That seems to always be on.
I absolutely cannot thank Scott enough for taking the time to talk to me about Sidemen. Without his film, a lot of people would have missed out on the tremendous contributions Pinetop, Big Eyes, and Hubert made to the world of music. If you haven't yet seen the film, it's available at retailers like Amazon and also available on iTunes. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.